Hello, everybody. As promised, here is the chart of Marina Abramovic. And after we've looked at the chart, we're going to be having a look at some details about her, experience, how she's tied in, try and figure her out because she's come to light. We know she's mixed in with Bill Gates, Hillary Clinton, spirit cooking. So she's definitely a person of note we need to evaluate. I would say that throughout history, people like Aleister Crowley, Jack Dee, Rasputin, Blavatsky, they've always been involved with the elite. So it's interesting to know what role they play, because as I've talked about often, the elites are much more aware of the use of symbolism, of rituals, of mysticism, even astrology, than they like to make out in public. In fact, in public, they would openly dismiss all those things as a lot of hocus pocus, but behind the scenes, they're dabbling in them. So Marina Abramovic was born the 30th of November 1946 in Belgrade, Serbia, or former Yugoslavia. And here's her chart. Now, interestingly, like I said, there you see the ascendant, 24 degrees of Cancer. Virtually the same degree as Bill Gates and Meghan Markle, and similar to them, she's had a bit of a PR disaster because, as you know, her advert that she did for Microsoft didn't exactly go down very well. Or was it Google? I don't know. I think no, it was something to do with Bill Gates. Wasn't she advertising something to do with a Microsoft product? And didn't go down especially well, and it had to be withdrawn. So people are looking at her with a little bit of skepticism, saying, what the hell is going on now? She's Cancer rising, and her ruling planet, the moon, is in the 8th house, which is totally appropriate for someone whose life's work involves the occult. Let's have a look here. This is very significant. Saturn in the 1st house and Saturn conjunct Pluto. Pluto is just there on the cusp of the 2nd house. So let's have a look about Saturn in the 1st. This is a person who's kind of dignified, a hint of austerity about them. She's got a lot of self-control, extreme determination and purpose. This is a person who can be quite serious, hardworking, maybe even cruel and callous in some ways. It indicates a cold or a tough upbringing, and we will come back to that when we look at what she says about her upbringing. It shows very good reasoning ability and a certain pragmatism to her nature. Saturn in the 1st indicates a sense of proportion, which is very helpful if you're an artist. So you can see here the stellium of planets in her 5th house, indicating that creative, artistic side of her and a life devoted to art. But of course also art mixed with the occult, because we've got Neptune there in the 4th, Moon in Aquarius in the 8th, and of course Jupiter, Venus, and Mercury retrograde all in Scorpio. So you can see it's not just art, there's a heavy emphasis towards the occult, which is also shown by Saturn conjunct Pluto. She's very loyal. There's a need to be responsible and to accept a hard road in life. So she was brought up tough. She probably had early responsibility, and there was definitely a sense of austerity about her childhood. Often people with Saturn in the 1st are either the oldest child or an only child, where they experience a sense of loneliness, or perhaps they grow up in conditions that are very harsh, in terms economically harsh, or sometimes there's financial abundance, but the parents are cruel and there's a lack of love. Now, when people have a Cancerian ascendant, there's often an orphan complex. I think Meghan has that a little bit, where people perceive they didn't get enough nurturing love, care, and attention from their parents, and they feel figuratively orphaned, and they go through their life searching somewhere to belong, somewhere to heal that inner wound where they just didn't get enough care and attention. Because a Cancer rising needs a lot of tenderness. And when they don't get that, they go through their life looking to find it somewhere, and it can actually drive them into a lot of bad decisions and extreme behavior to try and fill that gap. Usually the only way it can be filled is via self-love, right? So obviously I think Marina's trying to fulfill it via her aspirations. Of course, Saturn in the 1st being very ambitious, her aspirations to power, and the way she conducts her art. There is great steadfastness in the eye of a storm. This person is tough, hey? Saturn in the 1st. They're stalwart, they're not gonna, when the going gets tough, they're gonna be there. In fact, they kind of enjoy it. Once again, there's the indication of limitations and hardship in childhood, which has fueled a great ambition. Can be very selfish and self-protective. There's a deep distrust of others, but this gives rise to a strong need for power and status, almost to be vindicated. But there can be a kind of a scheming attitude to just do anything to get what she wants, because there's this insatiable desire to prove herself. And sometimes there's a lot of depression, and there's a great need to overcome a lack of self-worth. Now here you see Saturn in the first is squaring up to Jupiter, Saturn being in Leo, is squaring up, which is powerful. Saturn's powerful in Leo, that ambition and sense of purpose, very strong, and determination. It's squaring up to Jupiter in Scorpio, indicating her associations and involvement with the rich, which you also see in Megan's chart. She has a very strong, her moon is conjunct Saturn and Jupiter in a conjunction in Libra, so it's also the great attraction that the rich and famous have for her, as it does for Marina. So let's look at Saturn conjunct Pluto, and I'm going to quote, "This is the aspect of the magician. There is the ability to channel occult powers." So interesting that that should be virtually in her first house. A very strong aspect. As you can see, it's tied in there to Jupiter as well. So it gives strong ambition again. The ideas and the projects of the person with Saturn conjunct Pluto can transform the world. There's also a great interest in science and acquiring scientific knowledge, particularly in order to achieve power. This person can be very serious-minded, very determined, also very secretive. There's often intrigue in the life of this person. There are secret enemies, and also power struggles, and they can generally have a very far-reaching and long-lasting effect on the people or their environments. So this is a powerful aspect there, especially connected to the first house. Now we go to Neptune in the fourth. Now there seems some controversy over who and what her father exactly was. Neptune in the fourth generally indicates that the person was disappointed in their father. They had a kind of up and down relationship with him, in ways they idealized him, in ways he disappointed them. So there's definitely a complex relationship with the father, playing into lack of self-esteem and a sense of not knowing who and what they are and what they stand for, because Neptune in the fourth always loosens the roots, loosens the foundations, and makes you be a person who's unanchored, and therefore drifts in life. And of course, Moon in Aquarius is very much the sign of the nomad, the person who drifts from group to group, from clique to clique, a person who's basically at home anywhere but also at home nowhere. Someone who can fit in with numerous different people, from the elites to the bohemian people to the art people, a person who fits in everywhere. That's Moon in Aquarius. But a person who, although comfortable everywhere, longs to just set down roots, feel a strong association with a place, just to be anchored. And it's very difficult to achieve with Neptune in the fourth. There's also the fact that she might have inherited her psychic ability from her father. And this also indicates family secrets, intrigue, skeletons in the closet, mystery surrounding her family, and just there's a general fog surrounding the family arena of her life. Things are very unresolved. Things continue to niggle. Nothing's clear. There's a lot of sentimentality over her family and her youth, yet a lot of upset, a lot of disappointment as well. So, of course, the stellium of planets, we've got Jupiter, Venus, Mercury retrograde, Sun and Mars, all in the fifth house. Three of those, the first three in Scorpio, the second two in Sagittarius. That's the strong association with the art world. Also indicates children. What's going on here with children? Now, she's had a few abortions, I think, so she doesn't have any children. But I wonder how exactly she's tied into children. There's a great need for self-expression. There's a great need to find power via self-expression. There's an association with performance, an interest in love affairs, certainly very interested in playing the love game is Marina. Seeking of pleasure, also a personality that's very dramatic, very willful, can be very domineering, but certainly someone who's a great desire to capture their essence in terms of creativity, to express that and to direct their life towards creative enterprises. Now, Uranus is here. It's in Gemini, and it's just about to go into a 12th house. I think we can call that Uranus in the 12th. It's a bit wide of a conjunction with the node. So Uranus in the 12th is again synonymous with the occult. There can be, in many people, very strong humanitarian desires, or there can just be manipulative, destructive psychic forces. There's always two ways that this can go. This can be a person who devotes their life to improving the lives of others, to humanitarian, to justice, to egalitarianism, or it can be someone who delves in a negative way into psychic forces for their own selfish needs. There's definitely a quest for a higher spiritual identity. So Uranus in the 12th brings a great need to explore the spiritual realm, to understand it, to maybe even capitalize on it. A lot of people with this position are interested in yoga, mysticism, meditation, ways to just calm the body, let the veneer of the life we live, just kind of slip away, and to gain access to your higher self. There can often be clairvoyance, and the people with Uranus here are often the repository for secrets of other people. They often belong to secret societies as well, and they enjoy spending a lot of time in seclusion. It's a time when they think, like to be alone. It's the sign also of the loner, a person who's a bit of an eccentric or a weirdo, likes to keep themselves to themselves. So, of course, with all these Scorpio planets, Moon in the 8th house, there's a very secret side to her, a hidden side that no one knows about. Moon in the 8th, certainly an interest in life after death, in reincarnation. It indicates psychic abilities, clairvoyant abilities, possibly an early involvement with sex through maybe, I don't know, you could guess in general to sex abuse as a child, or some form of sexual abuse as a child, or very early experimentation with sex. That's often common with that there. It does indicate an emotionally demanding character, someone who is, with all these 5th house planets, I'll say she's pretty emotionally insatiable, definitely needs to be put on a pedestal, needs constant reassurance, acclaim, vulnerable to flattery for sure, because she is so emotionally vulnerable. She's really looking for something to fill that gap. So she needs compliments, she needs reassurance a heck of a lot. This can be a very intense and dramatic personality, quite controlling, and definitely a complicated personality. Someone who finds it very hard to find satisfaction, and someone who, with Moon in Aquarius, looks in very unusual places to find security, solace, satisfaction, and emotional fulfillment. So as I said before, Moon in Aquarius kind of fits in everywhere. Often there's a political link. The family's quite political, and they can often have a friendly but impersonal manner. Now here you've got Venus conjunct Mercury retrograde, which indicates a very friendly person, especially because Venus and Jupiter are conjunct, connected to the moon, certainly friendly, maybe too people pleasing, maybe terribly insincere, maybe almost sugary and extremely persuasive but manipulative. So definitely a very friendly side. But is it just impersonal? Is it really a little bit superficial? Moon in Aquarius and also Uranus in the 12th, extremely open-minded, very liberal-minded, very unorthodox, certainly experimentational personality. There's a big need to seek freedom of emotional expression. She just cannot stand being trapped, loves to roam, loves to come and go as she pleases, wants to be free of any emotional attachments, right? So this is a very restless personality. So you've got here Mars in Sagittarius, opposite Uranus in Gemini, and that sort of traverses the 5th and the 11th, or maybe the 6th and the 12th as well. This indicates a person with high energy, very highly strung person, rebellious, hates authority, very revolutionary tendencies, can have quite a temper, and can be pretty irrational at times. This is a person who certainly thinks out of the box, right? This is a person who dislikes routine and structure, although with Saturn in the 1st, she does create a certain amount of routine and structure. She is very disciplined when it comes to achieving what she wants, but she certainly won't be told by anyone else what to do. She demands total freedom in terms of what she does artistically, and definitely wants to push the boundaries, and definitely wants to be controversial and challenge people, because this is controversy, is all about this aspect. There's a lack of moderation, of course. Scorpio planets, Moon in the 8th, definitely a lack of moderation. Stubborn. There's the danger that often comes with this of a violent death, but I think, look, she's gone this far. I don't think that's going to happen in her case. Very willful nature. She will do her own thing at all costs. Sometimes these people cut their nose off to spite their face, and they can be extremely, it's kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater. They can throw away years of work if they become frustrated and angry with that work. So sometimes they act very counterproductive to their own benefit, to their own interests. So as you notice there, Uranus opposite Mars rules the Uranus, of course, is ruling the 8th house of death. So I'm thinking here that she's toyed with death. I think she definitely has, hasn't she? She's toyed with death. She's had near-death experiences. There's also a kind of sadomasochistic element to this, I think. So it's quite an interesting opposition. Mars opposition Uranus, Uranus going into the 12th, and Uranus ruling the 8th. Kind of plays into this whole, radical approach she has to living. So Marina has Sun trine Saturn and Sun trine Pluto. Obviously, Sun here in Sagittarius is trining the Leo Saturn Pluto conjunction. So the Sun trine Saturn, she is practical. She's got definitely a very pragmatic side. She's circumspect, very self-controlled. She's an extremely purposeful and resourceful person. She's got a great deal of focus and concentration, which of course you need to be an artist, and a high level of discipline. So often an ability to structure your life is essential to being a good artist, and I'd say she's good artist. She's fairly successful, isn't she? The Sun trine Pluto means there are evolved powers of concentration, a transformative ability. She's great level of insight, very intuitive. And again, you see this interest in spirituality, supernatural energy, yoga, and meditation. So I spoke before about Moon here being square to this whole Mercury retrograde, Venus in Scorpio thing. That does indicate a certain immorality and indiscretion. Speaking in an indiscreet way, not being particularly careful about certain things she says. Also a level of emotional immaturity. Now, you often find with people who do suffer abuse, which could be symbolized by the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, partially in the first, it does indicate a certain amount of abuse. And we wondered here if Moon in the 8th could have indicated some sort of sexual abuse. It's possible. That often leads to an emotionally stunted nature, which drives certain characteristics that are compulsive later in life. So I'm wondering if an obsessive quality to her nature is driven by this emotional immaturity, as we see with Moon square Mercury retrograde. That does indicate some sort of emotional immaturity. There's definitely this people-pleasing side to her as well. She knows how to get on people's good side, and in that way she can be extremely persuasive. She's definitely aesthetically inspired. She's drawn to what's I don't know what she does is beautiful. It isn't beautiful to me, but maybe with Venus in Scorpio, her taste in what's beautiful is very different to mine, of course. With I've got Venus in Pisces, so I don't think I'm ever going to see eye to eye to her about what's beautiful. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about Jupiter in Scorpio. This is a very interesting one. I mean, by memory, I'm sure OJ and Nicole Simpson both had Jupiter in Scorpio, and we know how that turned out. So it's quite an explosive position of Jupiter. So it also indicates an obsession with sex, sexually insatiable. But once again, there's this intrigue about the occult mysteries, also religions and life after death, high levels of desire. Again, this high need for emotional satisfaction or sexual satisfaction or conflating of the two. We get again the sense of a very high desire nature. It's obvious she has to plow so much of her energy into creativity to just sate this thing inside her that she needs to get out. There's an awful lot bubbling up under the surface, and she's just got to get it out there. Okay, so the problem with Jupiter in Scorpio is it can lead to an intense, uncompromising nature, which is also extremely jealous. Again, we've got the seeking of power, and a person like this can make bitter enemies. They can also be very destructive and very, very greedy. So the Jupiter conjunct Venus in Scorpio also indicates strange friendships and alliances. So she can fall into bed with very different sorts of people, right? So we can see there whether it's the Clintons, Bill Gates, who else, is out there that she's in bed with. But they're intrigued. I mean, they love to push the boundaries with all these Scorpio placements, and particularly Jupiter and Scorpio, always looking to push boundaries and to dabble in what's dangerous, what's unorthodox, what's taboo. This is an absolute obsession with taboos, exploring taboos, changing other people's minds about taboos. That's all there, and that's definitely what she's up to. They can also be secret love affairs, and she knows a lot about people's secrets. Now we get that too about Uranus in the 12th, and here again with Jupiter in Scorpio and these other planets in Scorpio in the 1st. She knows a lot about other people's private affairs. Now how she does, we don't know, but she does. There's also an interest in seances, mediumship, and the tendency to dabble in negative occult forces or the occult realm in terms to make money or get power. So there's certainly the suggestion here of using the tools, the tricks of the trade, what she knows from the occult, in order to wield influence, very similar to what Aleister Crowley did. And as we talked about before in her chart with the Saturn-Pluto thing here, the desire to shape society, the desire to transform society and have an impact on the general, both the scientific progress of society and the spiritual progress of society. Pluto the second, of course, is associated with great wealth. I don't know how wealthy she is, but I don't think she's doing badly, do you? Venus conjunct Jupiter, there's a lot of luck in this chart, but also associated with greed and jealousy, that one, intense jealousy over financial things. But she can be very fortunate in terms of financial prosperity as well. Definitely an optimistic side to her nature there, a very expansive side, a pioneering side, which we certainly see. But there's also a tendency to be excessive, to waste. And although she is, and yes, she's very sociable, she's drawn to people who are philanthropic, which I suppose Bill Gates would call himself one of those people. I know on that channel we don't see it quite that way, but she is drawn to the whole charity, philanthropy field. But as I say, is it all just a means to an end? Let's end off here by talking about Venus. There we go, in Scorpio, square Pluto. Venus square Pluto, intense, emotional. Again, here we're getting this intense, emotional and sexual side to her, a very passionate, dramatic person. This does actually aid artists because it just gives this inspiration. I think people who are very good artists generally are supercharged emotionally, and are passionate people, do have a kind of high octane emotional nature. They feel things very deeply. They can be people who are extremely angry at one stage, extremely happy. They're people who experience the emotions across the spectrum, and she does. She certainly experiences every emotion across the spectrum, from hate to love, from jealousy to generosity, everything there she will experience. That's typical of good artists, and I'm not saying she's a good artist. I don't get art. I don't get her art, but really I don't want to be judgmental about something that I don't really know anything about. There's a lot of ups and downs in her love life, and in her life in general is subject to huge ups and downs. And because Venus there rules her home life, her home life is also subject to these ups and downs, subject to great secrets. I don't even think she fully understands at a deep level who she is, where she comes from, what she really wants. There's a great deal of confusion at a deep psychological level within her, stemming from that family background. Venus square Pluto often indicates karma, very prevalent in love, and fatal attraction. That's the aspect of fatal attraction. There's also power games, manipulation, jealousy, and sometimes narcissism in a love arena. Again, the desire for money, for power, but she is a great emotional force which feeds into this creativity, artistry, and inspiration. Now, once again, it suggests that magic, maybe black magic, occult powers, can be used to gain love or to influence the public or gain fame or wealth. So guys, how did you enjoy that? That was a rather interesting reading. So what I'm going to talk about now is to throw in, that's what my opinion on her character. We've got an article which we're going to flush out the details and add a bit of context. This article is by a lady called Elemi Fuentes, and I'll leave a link to it, and she's done some great research on this. She's also on Twitter if you want to follow her. Some good ideas on her page, and I'm going to look at that article now, and we're going to discover more about the wonderful world of Marina Abramovic. So Marina is considered to be a modern artist, a conceptual modern artist, which is what exactly I'm not quite sure. But anyway, What's interesting to know is that modern art was actually developed by the CIA in order to combat the propaganda war of the Soviet Union. And it was backed by Nelson Rockefeller. So here we go, these names emerging. You just can't get away from them. They've got a finger in many pies, even modern art. I believe a lot of modern art, as well as has been suggested by certain people, is a form of money laundering. So when you see these disgusting forms of art being sold for millions, it's not because someone really wants access to the talent behind these. It's about money laundering. So as you know, anything that the CIA does is linked to the deep state. So was it really a fight against communism? Because while the CIA implemented the move, according to what Emily Fuentes says, the type of degenerate art was actually a counterculture attack on Christian European societies before the First and Second World War broke out. So it's just an old trick. When the CIA are doing something, it's really the deep state, and when the deep state are doing something, it's really connected with the cabal, the elite. So this type of degenerate art has always been a weapon against, should we say, Christian democratic society. Okay, so let's go on to say, so Marina was born in Serbia in 1946. We already covered that, of course. She was born on the 30th of November. And for the first 6 years of her life, she said she lived with her very religious grandmother, who belonged to the Orthodox Church and had a liking for dishing out punishments in the form of a whipping. And these rituals also included drawing blood. Now, here we see the abuse we talked about. It sounds like here emotional abuse, a very strict upbringing, beatings, all this doesn't sound very savory. So that's exactly what we talked about here, Saturn, Pluto, and also to an extent Moon in the 8th. This whole drawing out of blood sounds weird. And we expected some weirdness, didn't we, with Neptune in the 4th and Moon in the 8th. So later her brother Wilimir was born, and at that point they moved back to their parents. Her brother is now Professor Dr. Marina Abramovic, and he is very interested in Nikola Tesla. Didn't Nikola Tesla come from this part of the world? Was he from the Balkans or was he from Czechoslovakia? I can't remember. But anyhow, there's sort of certainly is an interest. So in her many interviews and biographies, she states that she's never been married. Apparently that's not true. She's had 2 marriages, the first one to Nessa Paripovic, a Serbian artist, and the later to Paolo Cannavaro, who is another artist, this time from Italy. So twice she's been married. Let's see here. Well, she does have intense love affairs, so it's highly likely she has been married because, of course, with Venus square to Saturn, there's a desire to make it formal. Marina has had 3 abortions. I think I talked about that. It's a very complex sort of relationship she has to children. She said it wasn't because of any medical or for psychological reason, but she said children hold a female artist back. So here's the choice she's kind of making between art and children. So 3 abortions, wow. Hasn't she heard of contraception? Anyway, now, it's said that Marina is related to Rasputin. You know, Rasputin, Rasputin, lover of the Russian queen. I think we'll have to do a vlog on him at some stage, but obviously a very influential guy in the Russian royal family. Another one of these mystics, not much known about him, had supernatural powers, maybe, maybe not. So it's not clear whether this is true or not. It'd be very hard to prove. But what does seem to be true is that she's the great-granddaughter of Venara Rosic, who was a priest from Saba, Serbia. And Veneraba was in fact born in Petarosic, in some place that I just cannot pronounce. I won't, because it'll offend anyone from Serbia. And according to letters sent from Father Grigory Shavelsky to Father Vostokov, Venerana liked to wear women's clothing, throw wild parties in the monastery, and take boys to his bed. Well, and upset about that, but I'm sure you guys can certainly see a pattern emerging of this kind of unorthodox way of living, a little bit decadent, a little bit flamboyant, maybe downright criminal in some cases, but certainly it's within her history to be unorthodox and to kind of toy with the taboos. So Vernava, I just make sure I'm getting his name right. His name is Venara Rosic. Okay. And anyhow, he was a patriarch of the Serbian Orthodox Church from 1930 to 1937. And as they said, where he was born he was born in this place, which is now part of Serbia, which was currently part of the Ottoman Empire when he was born back in the day. So anyway, it appears that Vernava and Rasputin had met on several occasions. Maybe they weren't exactly best friends, but it seems that Rasputin could have helped advance Vernava's career, and Vernava could have defended Rasputin against attacks within the ranks of the church. So there is a little link to Rasputin. So on her maternal side, Marina is a direct descendant of the old Luciferian European houses. Her family are direct descendants of the house of Hugh Capet. Hugh Capet, who was born in 941 and died in 966 AD, was the first king of the Franks of House Capet from his election in 987 AD until his death. So the members of the House of Capet were originally of the Satanic religion, who perpetuated human sacrifices and blood rituals in underground temples in Paris, named after Paris of Troy. The Cathedral of Notre Dame is built over one of these satanic temples, and it's still in use today. I found that really interesting because she talked about the grandmother drawing blood. There's punishments that involve drawing of blood, etc. And now we see that from her maternal line there seems to be a link to a satanic religion who were involved in human sacrifice, blood rituals. Sounds like a little bit like that ritual that comes out of Mexico, Pao Mumbe, right? And they talk there about underground temples in Paris, and the Cathedral of Notre Dame being built on one of these satanic temples. I'm thinking of the words of that hymn, Jerusalem, our dark satanic mills. Are there allusions in that hymn to something satanic going on? Something that's probably still going on now, but we don't call it Satanism now because people poo-poo all that sort of stuff and don't think that it's at all relevant. So anyhow, Marina, according to this article, seems to be a pathological liar. Well, I'm not actually sure she is, because really, look, Mercury in Scorpio retrograde, yeah, I mean, she might manipulate via falsehoods, but there's no obvious link to a communication house in Neptune, is there? Or from Mercury to Neptune. I didn't get pathological lying. Manipulation, yes. And maybe narcissism. And narcissism indulges some gaslighting. But I don't know about a pathological liar from this chart, but okay. So according to her, her father was a hero, but her brother Velimir tells a very different story. He said their father was an old communist. He became a member of the Communist Party in 1934, but he was never a hero. In fact, they were Yugoslav partisans, and after the Second World War, her father became an elite guard for Joseph Broz Tito, and her mother was the director of the Museum of Art and Revolution in Belgrade. So you see, there's that link to revolution in the family as well. So her father heavily involved with Tito, so there's a political link. So you can see where maybe her power and influence comes from. If her father was involved with Tito, who was the dictator in Yugoslavia, you can see that there was a dynamic where she could move into that world of influence, of power, of hobnobbing with politicians, etc., in the communist states, and then kind of moving like all the communists did seem to move so effortlessly over to the US to exert influence. And her mother, artist as well, Belgrade Museum of Art and Revolution. Notice here's this revolutionary thing coming up again, like we've got Mars opposite Uranus, etc. So Marina herself would later join the Communist Party, but regardless of claims, she had a very privileged upbringing. Well, we said that the upbringing with Saturn in the first could be privileged, but emotionally deprived. But here we do have Venus conjunct Jupiter, which indicates money, does indicate some privilege. You know, there does indicate to be some sort of luck and money running in this chart. Interesting that she was part of the Communist Party. Okay, so Marina's brother is Professor Dr. Velimir Abramovic. He's a philosopher and a mathematician whose work appears to consist mainly on refuting Einstein's theories on electrodynamics. And he's also very concerned with the possibilities of the many infinities and, of course, the work of Nikola Tesla. So again, we talked about Marina and science. Her brother's certainly very much involved in science. She's involved in science from the sort of occult field, and there certainly is a branch of science connected to the occult, but he's involved in the more conventional science. So their family is certainly investigating possibilities. You know, there was a book written by Sheila Ostrander and I've forgotten her name, Linda. Anyway, if you look up Sheila Ostrander and psychic discoveries behind the Iron Curtain, all the Soviet states behind the Iron Curtain did an immense amount of research into psychic phenomena, from Kirlian photography, from kinetic motion, oh gosh, I've forgotten exactly what it's called, but and remote viewing, all these sort of psychic phenomena were immensely tested in the Soviet Union. So coming out of not only the Soviet Union, everywhere behind the Iron Curtain. So coming out of Serbia, she was well placed, especially with her father involved with Tito, to have been involved in these experimental very well funded experimental government institutions that were looking into psychic phenomena. So she could have got a kickstart, because who knows what was discovered behind the Iron Curtain. Because I believe when the Soviet Union fell, one of the main things that the American universities went for was their psychic archives, their occult archives, rather than all the nuclear stuff, the chemical warfare, the biological warfare, anything they could get their hands on about the psychic research done behind the Iron Curtain. They grabbed it, and it's in archives in universities in America now. So that was one of the most sought after things, and I think it's even in the library of the House of Congress. They have all these files that the Russians had from their research into psychic. So I think there's definitely a link. Her being Serbian says to me that she was involved somehow in the psychic research going on behind the Iron Curtain. She's the right age, being more 1946, to have been able to capitalize or been involved in that. So maybe that gave her kickstart or her head start on things occult. I can't even remember all the things. Is it kinetic motion, the other one? I don't know. But there were a lot of things. You can look up that book yourself. It's a good book, but very poorly written and edited. It definitely needs a professional editor to typen it up. So Velimir, that's her brother, is well known in Astana, Kazakhstan, which this author said is the capital of the New World Order. And she's got a picture on her website there of some pyramid-looking structures in Astana, Kazakhstan. Well, I don't know about that. You'll have to tell me, guys. Have you ever heard of this Astana, Kazakhstan being the capital of the New World Order? I definitely think it's got links to the Silk Road, but I don't know about the New World Order. I might have to look into it. So her brother is a member of the Institute for the Science of Time, also known as Academia Noia, Noia. And what's interesting is that they've concerned themselves with the study of what's called the noosphere, and you spell it Noosphere, and it comes from the Greek nous, mind, spira, globe, and a figurative envelope of conceptual thought or reflective impulses produced by the human intellect. Wow, okay, you can unpack that one yourselves. Greek philosophers wrote extensively about the thought world and how it was just as real as the matter or quantum world, and how events can be influenced by the power of the mind alone. Yes, mind power, remote viewing, the possibilities of affecting things with your mind only. That was a massive thing that the countries behind the Iron Curtain were investigating and doing research in, very in-depth research, because people in the Soviet Union, because it's such a remote place where people live in such a harsh environment weather-wise, and because the country's undergone so much suffering through revolutions, through what happened in World War II, that sort of suffering kind of triggers something psychic and makes people more able to use their psychic powers, right? So it was ripe for the pickings to do the psychic research there. But it's very interesting that here, the power of the mind, and this is what he's very interested in. Okay, so he said events can be positively or negatively influenced by the power alone of the mind. And he said travel and the travel and spread around the world was of this energy called global consciousness. Isn't really, people aren't aware of it. I would link that to the 100th monkey theory, because he talks there about the travel and spread of mind power across the world. And you know the 100 monkey theory, it's, say you've got some islands, some random islands, and the monkeys on one island learn to do something. Maybe humans help them to learn to do something, or they just do it through an organic process. And even if those monkeys on that island have no contact with monkeys on a nearby island, strangely the monkeys on the nearby island suddenly start learning that thing as well. There's just a mental link between the species, and maybe that's what he's talking about there, is the psychic link we all have as a species. Anyway, he says this is the reason why inventions do occur simultaneously around the world from people who've never met or had contact with each other before. So there you go, I was right, 100 monkey theory. And it does happen. You know, someone discovers something in Ethiopia, and the next thing someone in, I don't know, Australia has discovered the same thing. It's the mental psychic link between us as a species, and it's an example of how mind power works. So brother believes that we are energy, everything around us is energy, including inanimate objects. And he said everything vibrates and resonates at different frequencies. I mean, this is key to what Linda Goodman has talked about in her books. Linda Goodman, the astrologer from America. Everything vibrates to a unique electromagnetic frequency. And I believe the Rife machine, which cures cancer, is based on this concept, right? So this energy and frequency can be used and is, in essence, harvested for different purposes. So he goes on to say, remember I said in my reading of the Chart of America that I would talk about prayer in relation to Marina Abramovic. Well, he believes, her brother, that prayer is one such concept. He said there are others, meditation, Reiki, but just as it can be used for good purposes, i.e. healing, it can also be used for evil. It's all about the intention. He said, your mind has an effect on the object observed, and at a grander scale, your mind can also have an effect on world events, which means people praying together can positively influence world events, right? And so we should be doing it. We should all be doing it, regardless of our religious beliefs. We should be praying together to influence things in a positive way. So he says in a quantum experiment, the outcome will vary depending on whether it's being observed or not. And in the matter world, the physical world, the counterpart is that actions are affected by thoughts. He said, try and imagine a triangle. Each side has one of these words, the quantum world, the thought world, and the matter world, and they are all interlinked and totally dependent on one another. And if we apply this concept to prayer or meditation or other forms of thought action, it can very well mean that 1 millimeter that deflects a bullet from its target. So let's not forget that and the power in this, and that Marina and her brother definitely understand that power. I think at this stage we should say that while we're talking about all these, the power of thought, we should just revisit the 100 monkey theory, because our DNA is shaped like a radio receiver. That's possibly the way that interspecies communication happens. It just makes me think of this whole mRNA vaccine and how that might impact not only the mitochondrial DNA, which has our evolutionary coding and information, how it may also affect the way we can psychically communicate with each other in relation to this. So anyway, just to go on about, it's very interesting to know what her brother is involved in, because we know that she's involved with Bill Gates, who's involved with Jeffrey Epstein. They are looking into all this science of the mind, but it's not often very much talked about. So their minds are going in all sorts of places. They are trying to access all sort of deeply secret science and tap into it. Now, just to mention, it was Sheila Ostrander and Lynn Schroeder that wrote that book, Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain, if you want to take a look at that. So this whole concept of the news sphere and increasing human energy might sound far-fetched, but there are a handful of laboratories around the world concerned with studying the effect that your mind has on everyday objects, actions, and events. Now, when they say a handful of laboratories, this study was commonplace behind the Iron Curtain. They were big into it, as you'll read in that book. So undoubtedly Serbia was as well, Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia. So the concept of the noosphere was developed by three main figures, Nikola Tesla, Vladimir Verdansky, and Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. And in today's modern world, the Tesla Institute still carries on that research. So what does it all mean? Well, basically, at the core of it, matter is binary, because there's just your protons in the nucleus being encircled by the electrons, and at the basic level, every single atom is made up just of that. Yes, there can be some neutrons in the nucleus as well, but essentially it's just a positive charge versus the electrons a negative charge. So it goes on to say that when you look at subatomic particles, you couldn't really say where a chair ends and the person sitting on it begins, because it's just energy, isn't it? It's just electrons and protons. So how would you know? So in terms of this whole noosphere or the thought world, similar things occur. We have our individual thoughts, which define us as a person, but we also have collective thoughts, because just as they're saying, just as you can't tell where, at a subatomic level, where the chair ends and the person sitting on the chair begins, how do you tell where your thoughts end and the next person's thoughts begin? And hence we have this thing about collective thoughts. There's all the information we get via the press, TV, entertainment, but our thoughts could also be affected by whether the neighbor living next door is in a good mood or a bad mood. I've actually noticed that, having lived in flats and in terraced houses, that on days where the neighbor was to be heard having a barney, which you can hear in summer because people have got the windows open, so you hear people having a barney. Well, it wouldn't just be the one neighbor, it would be kind of, it would, the mood would generate. If one was having a bad day, a collection of us would be having a bad day as well. So I've definitely noticed that neighborhood thing happening. So, as related to human energy and global consciousness, there's also the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which was founded in 1973 by Edgar Mitchell. So, obviously it sounds like a lot of incoherent ideas rather than a unified theory, if we could use that term. But there really is more to the reality of what we perceive, and having control over the unseen realities that exert power over our own. And that's where Marina Abramovic is really and clued up. She's clued into all this, as is her brother, and we know that the people she hangs out, and we're going to talk about the Vatican very shortly, also have a deep interest in all of this. And it goes on. I'm not going to read this part of the article. It's all about chirality, duality in the universe, but it's a little bit uninteresting. But if you can look at this article, you can also peruse it. They talk here about psychic physics models, which already theorize at least 10 dimensions. We know that CERN is looking for new dimensions. There are lots of mathematical models and evidence to suggest that there are so many dimensions beyond our own four-dimensional plane of existence. There is another researcher, Ruggero Santilli, and he did a paper entitled Apparent Detection via New Telescopes with Concave Lenses of Otherwise Invisible Terrestrial Entities. And he speaks of creatures living outside the spectrum of human visibility. I mean, guys, if you've watched David Icke, he always says that our vision is so limited to such a narrow band of light that we're virtually blind, really, because we're missing so much that's going on. But really, could we cope if we could see all these things? We probably couldn't. So it's probably best, in terms of our earthly experience, not to be seeing all that. Now, coming to the Vatican, this is from an Emily Fuentes tweet. She said, do you know the Vatican has the greatest astronomy lab out there that rivals NASA, the NSA, and the ESA? And do you know that one of the infrared telescopes from the Vatican is actually looking for extraterrestrials? And they've called this telescope Lucifer. Isn't that a bit odd? Who'd have believed, eh? So, the Vatican, no less, is looking for such entities. And I told you that the Vatican libraries are filled with all the really serious, in-depth research, whether it's astrological and the true nature of how astrology affects us and how and why it affects us, because at the very core of the Vatican, they do believe in astrology, despite what they might say publicly about, oh no, it's bad, don't do that. And also astronomy. The Vatican's deeply interested in these things. So obviously they're not so secure in what they are preaching. They're very interested in finding aliens, finding alien life. So as it happens, the Vatican has an observatory in Mount Graham, Arizona. It's within a very short distance of where the Semic story broke up. The Vatican and the University of Arizona paid billions to the natives who had this as consecrated land. And it's said that the location opens up one of the many portals around the world, which is said to allow entities through. I'm just thinking of CERN as well, because wasn't it even warned by Professor Hawkins that what they're doing at CERN could open gateways to other entities? I'm sure Elon Musk alluded to this. I think there's a lot more to what's going on at CERN. I think it's very much in terms of the occult, the esoteric, making contact with other entities with different dimensions. Extremely secretive, but I think we need to know a lot more about what's actually going on there. As I've said to you before, there's the science that we get to hear about on our level, and then there's the science that's really happening at the elite level. And a lot of the science that's going on for 99.9% of the population is almost a very rudimentary or even a fake and misleading science, so that people don't follow the threads and get a grasp of what's really going on. So the Vatican, along with the University of Arizona, lobbied in 1988 for the construction of 3 telescopes on Mount Graham. And they actually destroyed a lot of sacred Indian native land in the process. So why would that be? I mean, why is the Vatican so interested? Because the Vatican and the CIA work very closely together, right? So what else does the Vatican, the CIA, and the Knights of Malta, of which Abramovic is allegedly a member, and the Nazis do when they all get cozy? That was a quote from an Emily Fuentes tweet, and she's got some reading there on spirit cooking. the Nazis were never defeated. So she's trying there with that tweet to draw our attention to the fact that all the hidden technology that the Nazis were working on, Operation Paperclip, the formation of the CIA is very strongly linked to Operation Paperclip. Then you've got Marina Abramovic bringing knowledge from behind the Iron Curtain, all working together. Knights of Malta, very interesting cocktail. And it's rumored that Marina is also working closely with the Vatican. Now, you guys will know that I talked to a few blogs ago about how Bill Gates was having meetings at the Vatican with Google and whatever at the end of last year, and the new chief of Microsoft, along with Google and some other execs, were having meetings with the Vatican in February. So the Vatican is heavily involved in everything that's going on here. So Emily Fuentes is pretty sure that Marina herself is a member of the Knights of Malta, or at least the female version of that, which is called the Dames of Malta. And it's believed that she was also associated with Mother Teresa's charity, which is now involved in some sort of paedophilia scandal. So there's no doubt, and it will become clear as we go on and more comes to light, that a lot of people associated with Marina Abramovic are in turn linked to the unfolding paedophilia or human trafficking network scandal that's emerging the world over, particularly since the whole Epstein thing is coming to light. Okay, so the science says there are other dimensions. Her brother's very, very interested in this. CERN's looking for other dimensions. The Vatican's looking in both ways. I mean, they're looking in terms of through their telescopes to see what they can see. And I believe the Vatican is strongly working with CERN as well to see what can be perceived. I just find it's really interesting, in fact, that the Vatican, it's meant to be sort of preaching the Bible. It's meant to be taking care of people's spiritual well-being, their religious health, but they seem very well aware that there's something else going on in this universe that they're very interested in. I'm sure that's not being preached in churches across the Catholic world. I'm sure they're not telling people that the Vatican is actively looking for aliens and seems to very much believe in aliens and these entities, and indeed the occult. And I think a lot of the rituals that have filtered its way into either the Catholic or the C of E tradition come from pagan rituals. Some of them are influenced by even satanic rituals, like the drinking of the wine and the taking of the bread, the blood, and the body. When you're thinking of this drinking of in communion, when people are drinking the blood, and then you think of the stories about adrenochrome, it puts a whole new light on it, doesn't it? And then what about all the stories, Bram Stoker, who was a big friend of Aleister Crowley, writing about Count Dracula, who was a member of the aristocracy, drinking blood. It all sort of comes back together. The more you delve into the stuff, it's quite amazing everything that's going to that comes about. So I also am interested in the whole Arizona, not so far from New Mexico, where Epstein had his ranch. Certainly a great, bearing in mind it's so vast and so isolated in the desert. It's a great place for being able to look up to the sky without the kind of ambient light of the earth interfering. So there you go. So the article does go on, and it says here, certainly Marina Abramovic and her brother Velimir are both interested in the works of Nikola Tesla and the work on the same projects regarding the increase in human energy. So Marina's art performance, are they designed to harvest energy from the audience? Yes, they are. And the means by which this is achieved will be explored in further articles related to spirit cooking, etc., etc. So who really is Marina Abramovic? Is she just an obscure Serbian artist that rubs shoulders with the very elites of society just because she's been involved in some groundbreaking, exotic, unorthodox form of art and she's just become famous? Or is there something else? I mean, what's really going on here? Is she some sort of high priestess? Some sort of, what would you call it? Some sort of initiate that is helping these elites bring together these three sides of the triangle. Science on the one hand, science of the mind, the occult. What a powerful combination. Let's not just drift along, ruling out the occult as a key pillar or potentially of science and new direction science is going to take. So I hope you enjoyed that. As you know, I was rather interested to explore Marina Abramovic, and very grateful for that article from Emily Fuentes, which certainly throws a lot more light on it. Please take a look at the article. There's some pictures, some quotes, pictures from her Twitter feed, and you might want to follow her. As she says there, she's going to update it more about things like spirit cooking. Spirit cooking sounds to me a lot like Paumumbe, which is something, if you research the story of the monster of Matamoros, it was a very sick individual in Mexico who was involved in lots of murders, but he did something like that where he was creating a, what would you call it, a broth with blood and skeletons and animal parts, and it was very, very sick. It was ritualistic. It was a part of casting spells, etc. And that sounds like he was into a similar thing. So these things used to be really on the edges. We didn't really believe it was happening. We thought Satanism was in books and didn't really happen in real life. But Satanism and the occult, as I say, is very much linked to the way scientific thought is going at the moment. And I think Marina Abramovic is key to this whole thing. I'm sure we will revisit this topic, but we've touched on a lot of things, as you know. We always do. Hope you enjoyed it. Definitely more to come in this vein.